This is Black Unbounded, the place where silence turns into thunder, where the underestimated walk into rooms built to shut them out and leave with the keys in their hands, and where the stories of resilience, dignity, and power are told the way they were meant to be heard, not whispered, not hidden, but loud and unshakable. And tonight's story begins with one man, a man they said wasn't qualified, a man they doubted, a man they dismissed, until the moment they realized the truth, that every single policy line they were so proud it came from the very pen they tried to discredit. His name is Dr. Elijah Rowan, and this is his story. Elijah Rowan had grown used to being studied, not with curiosity, not with admiration, but with suspicion, with that quiet side-eye that questioned his right to stand where he stood, breathe the air he breathed, and speak with authority. It happened again that morning, right at the gleaming entrance of the corporate headquarters where the National Conference on Executive Policy Reform was being held. The security guard scanned him from head to toe, his lips pursed like he was calculating an error, like the system had hiccuped and allowed someone like Elijah into this space. Clipboard in hand, badge shining under fluorescent light, the guard asked for his name for the fourth time, stretching the syllables of disbelief like they tasted sour on his tongue. Elijah's voice was calm, even, a tempered flame that didn't flicker even under wind. Dr. Elijah Rowan, I am here as a guest speaker for today's panel on executive policy reform. I'm listed. You'll find me on your sheet. The guard squinted, leaned into his earpiece, muttered something under his breath, and then tilted his head, eyebrows climbing with a mix of arrogance and doubt. Maybe there's been a mistake. You don't exactly look like the people we're expecting today. That line, that knife coated in politeness, but sharp enough to slice identity into shreds. Elijah had heard it all his life, in classrooms, on job applications, in hallways where he was always the only one who looked like him. Never blunt, never loud, but always there, the low hum of prejudice disguised as protocol. And yet Elijah did not shrink. He did not bow. He reached into his briefcase, pulled out the embossed invitation with his name stamped in gold, held it eye level to the guard, and said, "You can double-check that with your supervisor. I'll wait right here." Behind him, streams of executives in polished suits and gleaming heels walked past, offering sideways glances, some whispering, some smirking, all convinced that he didn't belong, that maybe he was lost, maybe catering, maybe janitorial staff, but certainly not a voice meant to stand at the front of their stage. But Elijah stood unmoved because he wasn't just here to attend. He wasn't just here to speak. He was here to be seen, to be recognized, to take a seat at a table built on his blueprints, and whether they wanted to or not, they were going to hear him today. Inside, the ballroom glittered with chandeliers, long rows of tables draped in white linen, bottles of sparkling water perched at each seat like ornaments of wealth. The air carried the smug hum of conversations about markets, about governance, about progress, words spoken by people who rarely had to live with the consequences of the policies they praised. As Elijah moved to take his seat at the far end of the stage, a man with salt and pepper hair leaned toward him, lips curled in casual dismissal. "You must be with catering, right? Food's out back." Elijah's eyes met his briefly, not with anger, not with submission, but with a weight of patience sharpened into steel. He offered a polite nod, said nothing, and opened a folder before him. Inside was the very framework they were all gathered to debate, a framework he had written line by line, clause by clause, over 4 years of sleepless nights, relentless research, and conviction that justice was not just an idea but a structure, a system that could be built, defended, and made unshakable. What they didn't know was that they were sitting in his house, discussing his architecture, trying to hand him a mop while standing under the roof he had built. To understand how Elijah reached this moment, you must travel back to a small home in East Baltimore where resilience was not a lesson, but a daily reality. Elijah grew up the middle child of 3, his mother Dorothy working double shifts, cleaning offices by day, waiting tables by night, her hands callous, her eyes heavy, but her love unshaken. His father was gone, not absent by choice, but by the chokehold of a system that swallowed black men whole, leaving families to stitch together their survival with grit and prayer. Elijah was a quiet one, the observer, the boy with his head buried in books borrowed from libraries 2 bus rides away. Teachers often describe him as polite, but maybe not leadership material. They mistook silence for weakness, mistook humility for lack of fire. But Elijah's mind was a machine, gears whirring. Every injustice he witnessed logged away like evidence waiting for a courtroom. He earned a full scholarship to Howard University, his brilliance undeniable, his discipline unmatched. At Howard, he found his voice sharpened, his identity fortified, his purpose beginning to bloom. Then came Yale for graduate studies, a path most would leverage into high-paying jobs at law firms in Manhattan or D.C. But Elijah did something unthinkable. He went back home. While his peers donned designer suits and chased billable hours, he returned to Baltimore, to the neighborhoods with broken streetlights and schools crumbling from neglect, to a local policy office most dismissed as irrelevant, because Elijah knew something they did not. Change didn't begin at the top. Change began where the cracks were widest, where the people hurt most. It was there in that modest office with flickering fluorescent lights that Elijah discovered the real battlefield. He saw the fine print buried in policies that claimed to protect but instead excluded. He saw the loopholes crafted not by accident but by design, a language of power that disguised oppression as procedure. And so Elijah began writing. Not speeches, not think pieces, policies, real frameworks. He labored in silence, his pen carving structures no one could easily bend. His most ambitious work was a framework on executive accountability, whistleblower protections, and corporate misconduct. It was airtight, brutally honest, and dangerous, because it threatened to pierce the very shield corporations had used to hide their sins. Knowing what would happen if his name was attached, Elijah submitted it anonymously under a joint task force. And just as he predicted, it was embraced instantly, praised as groundbreaking, adopted across 5 states, cited in journals, celebrated at conferences. But the author, the architect, remained invisible, erased by bureaucratic handshakes and political posturing. Elijah allowed it, not because he lacked pride, but because he played the long game. He understood that sometimes the seed must stay buried before it breaks the soil. And then came today, a national panel of top minds assembled to debate the future of ethical leadership. On the list, professors from elite schools, CEOs from Fortune 500 companies, lawyers with glittering resumes. Not one name looked like his, until one planner, digging deep into metadata, discovered the truth of the authorship and reluctantly extended an invitation, not out of respect, but out of obligation. And so here he was, sitting on stage as they shuffled their papers filled with his words, dissecting his architecture without even recognizing the builder. The moderator began. Bios were read. Applause followed. Professor Harlan from Stanford. Applause. Dr. Monique Ellis from Harvard Law. Louder applause. Mr. Jerome Fisher, CEO of ClearTrack Industries. Roaring applause. And then, lastly, Elijah Rowan, representing the Baltimore City Council Advisory Board. A handful of claps. Awkward, polite, almost pitying, like applause for someone who stumbled but didn't quite fall. The first speaker launched into a critique of the framework, pointing out flaws, suggesting improvements, speaking with authority as though he owned the truth. Elijah sat, silent, watching them twist his intentions, dress his clarity in jargon, misinterpret his clauses. They spar with each other, flexing intellectual muscles, unaware that the very man who birthed those words was breathing quietly beside them. Finally, the moderator turned to him. Mr. Rowan, You've been quiet. What's your take on this proposed framework? Elijah's eyes lifted. He let the silence stretch, the room leaning in. Then, with calm precision, he spoke. First of all, let's stop pretending this framework was merely proposed. It was published, adopted, implemented 2 years ago in Maryland and Virginia under a different title. And I know this because I wrote it. The room froze. A cough, a pen clattering to the floor. Faces tightened, masks slipping. The moderator blinked. I'm sorry, you're saying? Elijah leaned closer to the mic. I'm saying that every word you've been discussing comes from a document I wrote during my tenure with Baltimore Civic Oversight Committee. The original title was Executive Ethical Conduct and Accountability Blueprint. It was revised before being made public, but the foundation, the intent, the structure, that was all mine. A current rippled through the crowd. Those who doubted him shifted in their seats. The man who mistook him for catering turned pale, sweat rising on his brow. Elijah wasn't finished. I didn't say anything before, because I wanted to see how this conversation would unfold without me, and it unfolded exactly as I expected. People more concerned with semantics than substance, more obsessed with credit than justice. But let me tell you something. Real policy is not about prestige. It's about protection. It is not written in boardrooms. It is written in neighborhoods, in courtrooms, in the silence of people who cannot afford to speak. If your concern is whose name is at the bottom of the page instead of the people it protects, then you are not doing the work. You are performing it. At first, the applause was hesitant. A few claps scattered, then louder, rising, growing into a wave that swept through the room. People standing, shouting, clapping not because he demanded it, but because truth has a sound, a drumbeat that cannot be ignored. After the panel, the same people who had dismissed him lined up to shake his hand. The same security guard who blocked his way now rushed to open doors, offer water, call him sir. The board chair, suddenly eager, proposed collaboration on future initiatives. Elijah smiled, his voice steady. We'll see if you're still interested when my name is on the front page next time. Today, Dr. Elijah Rowan leads the Dorothy Rowan Institute for Policy Reform, named after his mother, the woman who once scrubbed the floors of the very buildings that now house his blueprints. He consults on government accountability, but always under one condition: his name, his credit, his presence on the record, because silence built the old system. But his voice, his undeniable, unshakable voice, will build the new one. They said he wasn't qualified. They doubted. They dismissed. And then they realized the truth. He wrote the policy. And in that moment, justice was not delivered with vengeance, but with authorship, with ownership, with the power of walking into locked rooms and leaving with the key. They doubted him. They dismissed him. But when the truth came out, the room stood in silence, because real power doesn't need permission. It demands recognition. The lesson is clear. Never let anyone else define your worth, because the blueprint of change may already be in your hands. If this story moved you, comment your thoughts, like, share, and subscribe to Black Unbounded, where the untold stories finally roar.